everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Cryptos. One of the most mysterious, undeciphered codes in the world is a puzzle that sits right outside the CIA's cafeteria at their headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It's a sculpture called Cryptos, and it was constructed in 1991. The code consists of 865 letters and 4 random question marks, and the whole thing is stamped into a curving wall of copper. And although 3 passages were successfully decoded soon after the sculpture was first built, it hasn't been finished. The 4th and final section has proved so hard that it's been 30 years and still, the brightest minds in the world have yet to solve it. But sculptor Jim Sanborn, the man behind the code, recently came forward to give a clue. He released 2 previous hints, one in 2010 and another in 2014. But even with 2 clues, nobody was ever able to decipher Cryptos. His new clue, which is the 3rd and final clue he's given to help unravel the 97-character passage, is Northeast. The first 3 passages were solved by CIA physicist David Stein in 1998. He did it using nothing but pencil and paper to figure out the cipher and crack the code. Around the same time, a computer scientist named Jim Galogly cracked the code using a computer program. However, the 4th passage in the puzzle eluded them both. But why is this code so difficult to unravel? It's likely because Jim Sanborn used an ordinary cipher for the first 3 passages and then a layered cipher for the final passage. He also used spelling errors to make it even more confusing. There are over 2,000 people online dedicated to unraveling the secrets of the code. But the CIA can't do it, and neither can top scientists and computer programmers. If they can't do it soon, Jim Sanborn might have to unveil another clue. Number 9. The Sator Square. The Sator Square, also called the Templar Magic Square, is a very unusual mystery. Starting around the 1st century AD, these squares began to show up all across the ancient world. Each square is a 2-dimensional word square that contains 5 rows and 5 columns of Latin letters. There are 5 words inside the box: Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, and Rotas. They are positioned in such a way to create palindromes, with Tenet being at the very center of the puzzle. The reason these word squares are so strange is that nobody knows what they mean, why they were made, or how they ended up scratched into clay roof tiles from England all the way to North Africa. These things have also been found in Syria, Sweden, and across Europe. The earliest we know of is a Sator Square etched onto a column in Pompeii. Another was located in the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, and the Castle of Rochemar in France has a Sator Square too. This mystery is more baffling than most from the ancient world, especially because there are no written records of what a Sator Square was. We know that Sator was often used to reference Jupiter, the Roman version of ancient Greece's Zeus. But the other words don't make much sense. Nobody knows what arepo means, although it could be somebody's name. Tenet has a word that means to hold, while opera could mean with care. Though do keep in mind these are just educated guesses. Some believe the sentence inside the box could read, "The sewer arepo holds the wheels with care." But if that's correct, why in the world was such a simple sentence written all over the world in such a cryptic way? Why was it written on ancient scraps of papyrus, etched into clay tablets, and even fashioned into amulets? That translation doesn't seem right. During the Middle Ages, people thought the Sator Square was imbued with magical powers. Some even thought it was a charm that could ward away evil and illness. In Germany, there was a disc carved with the square that locals thought could put out fires. What do you think it means? Let me know in the comments. And now for number 8. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to Amanda Marshall, thank you, and Harry TV HMN, who is a new subscriber. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. We'd love to have you. Number 8. The Somerton Man Code. On December 1st, 1948, an unidentified man's body was found on the beach at Somerton Park, which is located in a suburb of Adelaide, Australia. Inside the pocket of the man's pants was a mysterious scrap of paper with the phrase "Tamam Shud" written on it. Translated from Persian to English, the phrase either means "is finished" or "is over." The scrap of paper was torn from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, an ancient book on astronomy authored in Persia in the 12th century AD. Investigators didn't know what in the world to think about this bizarre piece of paper, but they did manage to track down the book. What they found next is still baffling people to this very day. On the inside back cover of the book, detectives found a bunch of scribblings left behind in different people's handwriting. There was a local telephone number, another number that was never identified, and a text that looked like a coded message. Police puzzled over it for a very long time, but the text was never deciphered or coherently interpreted. The case is still considered one of Australia's greatest unsolved mysteries. The man was never identified, and the passage in the book was never explained. But things only get stranger the more you learn about the case. Staff at the Adelaide Railroad Station found a brown suitcase shortly after the discovery of the body. The suitcase had its label removed prior to being checked into the cloakroom, which happened just hours before the mystery man was found on the beach. It's believed that the suitcase belonged to the unidentified man, but all the tags and markings on the clothing had been meticulously removed, which meant there was no way to identify where anything came from. The only thing that wasn't removed was a name on a tie, T. Keene. Although that never proved useful because nobody named T. Keene was ever reported missing. It was probably a code name. But what does this mystery have to do with the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam? The scrap of paper with Tamam Shud written on it was stitched into a secret pocket inside the man's pants. The book the scrap came from was found randomly by a citizen in Adelaide who heard the cops were looking for it and turned it in. Nobody knows where the book came from or what its significance was. And it's still unclear as to who was leaving strange notes in the back of the book. All attempts to decode the scribblings have failed, and not even the most powerful code-breaking technology has been helpful in revealing the Somerton Man secrets. Any theories about what happened to him? Number 7. The Parchments of Rennes-le-Château. In the late 19th century, a series of parchments were discovered in the small French community of Rennes-le-Château. The story is extremely vague, and different versions of it have different people finding the parchments. Some mention a priest named Berenguer Saunière, but others say it was a priest named Ab Saunière. Either way, the priest allegedly discovered a collection of parchment hidden underneath the floorboards of his church. The documents were believed to have been placed there by his predecessors, and by their predecessors before them, going back centuries. Some of the parchments supposedly contain genealogical information on the surviving Merovingian bloodline, the family that ruled the Franks from the 5th century up until 751 AD. Written on the parchments are also extracts from the Gospels in Latin, and some coded messages that have never been deciphered. As far as we know, the genealogical documents have remained unpublicized. Some rumors even say the documents were picked up by British intelligence and locked in a vault. In 1967, most of the coded parchments were published by Gerard de Sede. It's unclear how he came into possession of the documents, but he released them to the public in his book. One of the texts was a collection of gospel accounts of Jesus and his disciples. In 1969, Henry Lincoln discovered a hidden message inside the script. The hidden message reads, "To Dagobert II, king, and to Sion is this treasure, and he is there dead." Dagobert II was a Merovingian king who ruled the Franks from 675 to 679 AD. The Merovingian kings were a very important bloodline in history because, according to some scholars, they were the direct descendants of Jesus Christ. The first Merovingian king was Childeric I in 481 AD. The last member of the bloodline that we know about was Theodoric IV, who died in 737 AD. If there is information about their surviving bloodline, we could identify a real, living relative of Jesus Christ. This is what makes the coded parchment so fascinating, but unfortunately very little is known about them. We don't know what the bizarre messages hidden in the scripts mean, and nobody knows how they came to be buried underneath a random church in the south of France. Number 6. The Indus Valley Script. It's been nearly 4,000 years since people wrote using the Indus Valley Script. It's one of the oldest written languages in the world, developed by the Indus Valley civilization starting around 3500 BC. But since this was 5,500 years ago on the Indian subcontinent, the origin of the language is poorly understood. In fact, the ancient writing system remains undeciphered to this day. Nobody knows how to read it or how in the world to decode it, and there isn't a single bilingual text that's been found anywhere. The Indus Valley civilization spoke one language and had one system of writing. Then, when they were gone for good, so was everyone who could understand their language. The earliest examples of the Indus script were found on scraps of pottery in the ruined city of Harappa. By around 2600 BC, during the urban period, the script had morphed into its fully developed form. Longer inscriptions were recorded, and there are thousands of them spread across more than 60 excavation sites in India and Pakistan. What makes these scripts so strange is that most of the inscriptions that have been located are very short. Even though this was a fully functional language, the inscriptions are trivial. The ancient Egyptians wrote things down on massive lengths of papyrus and practically wrote entire books on stone monuments. Yet the Indus Valley civilization usually wrote no more than 5 symbols or characters at a time, and none of these inscriptions are longer than 26 signs. To this day, scientists don't understand what information they were trying to convey using such small blocks of text. Still, the Indus Valley people must have understood what was going on. Their language has been found on tablets, bones, and square stamps, as well as pieces of bronze and copper. It seems that most people could read, but they could only read one language. It also doesn't look like the culture ever allowed foreigners into their cities. Otherwise, we would have bilingual text to help understand their forgotten language. Number 5. The Decoding Cipher. In 1939, a man named Alexander Decoding wrote a small book about cryptography called Codes and Ciphers. However, Alexander wasn't necessarily a cryptographical expert. On the very last page of the book, Alexander left a cipher of his very own. On page 144, he left a number cipher with an invitation for his readers to test their skills by trying to decipher it. Although it's now been almost 100 years, and nobody has ever succeeded. It's called the Decoding Cipher, and it's remained unbroken since before the end of World War II. Not even Decoding himself was ever able to decode it. The problem was, he forgot. So he was never able to unravel his own creation. And all of this for a clever cipher at the back of an elementary book on cryptography. A starter book that was supposedly for beginners. This isn't the only story of a self-taught cryptographer who forgot. There is another story of a spy who encrypted the locations of thousands of pages of sensitive documents he had stolen from the US government. The problem, he was dyslexic and forgot one of the cipher words he used to encrypt the location. So much for that. Number 4. The Dora Cipher. Edward Elgar sent a short, encoded letter to his friend Dora Penny in 1897. Edward's nickname for his friend was Dorabella, which is why we call it the Dorabella cipher today. The contents of the cipher were likely nothing out of the ordinary. After all, it was a simple letter from one friend to another. But Penny never figured out what the letter said. She was never able to crack the code, and all these years later, neither can the most sophisticated code-cracking programs. The cipher consists of 87 characters divided into 3 lines, broken down into 24 symbols, with all the symbols being made from semicircles. In some places, there is only one semicircle, but in other places, there are groups of 3 semicircles oriented at a weird angle. It's all very strange, and nobody knows what it means. Edward wasn't even a cryptographer. He was a 40-year-old music teacher who hadn't even done any successful composing. He was also in love with Dora Penny, who was 17 years younger than him. And while they never married, they did remain friends for the rest of Edward's life until his death in 1934. Although Edward wasn't famous when he wrote the cipher, he eventually composed orchestral works, such as the Pomp and Circumstance marches and, most fitting, the Enigma variations. When the Nazis needed a name for their code machine during World War II, they called it the Enigma machine after Edward Elgar's composition. One of the proposed solutions came from Javier Atanse, who believes the cipher is a melody instead of a text. He wasn't able to decode it, but thinks it's music, not words. In 2011, Canadian cryptographer Richard Henderson believed that he'd solved the cipher. According to him, it read, "Why am I very sad, Belle? I sag as we see roses do. E is ever fond of you, Dora. I know I pen one I love, all of my affection." Would you appreciate a letter like this? Seems like a lot of work to uncover what it says. What do you think? This solution sounds a lot better than the one proposed in 2020 by Wayne Packwood, who instead believed the code was this. A woman is exactly like chess, requires that one make many sacrifices for its queen, and the reward for doing so is victory. She commands that you not do better. I think I prefer the other interpretation more. As of now, none of these solutions have ever been confirmed as correct. We still don't know what the cipher says, or why Edward thought Dora would understand it. Number 3. The Ogham Alphabet. There is an ancient alphabet called Ogham, and it appears on monuments and in ancient manuscripts from between the 4th and 9th centuries in Ireland. It was used as an alphabet to write extremely primitive Old Irish, along with other ancient languages of the nearby British Isles. Ogham was also used for writing Old Welsh, Latin, and Pictish. It can be found carved in stone throughout Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales, and the Isle of Man. Although the alphabet is fully decoded and there are people out there who can read it, its origins are still a mystery. Keep in mind this isn't a language, but merely an alphabet. It's the same as how the Latin alphabet is used today in languages like German, Spanish, and English. Only Ogham was used about 1,600 years ago. Some believe the name came from the Irish god Ogma. We know it predates the earliest inscriptions, so it was likely already around in the 1st century AD. It may have been inspired by Roman and Greek script, or even runic symbols from Scandinavia. Researchers think it was first used to write Old Irish as a form of secret communication. It may have started as a way for people to leave messages to one another out in the wilderness that only specific people could read. However, the only surviving Ogham inscriptions are carved into solid rock, meaning it was likely more commonly inscribed onto trees and sticks. People may have used the script to mark ownership of territories and to etch names onto graves. Most Ogham is known, but there are a few even more primitive inscriptions that have yet to be deciphered, particularly in Irish and Pictish. There are also a bunch of bilingual inscriptions that blend Ogham with the runic alphabet, showing how its popularity was spreading. It became such a popular alphabet that it made its way from Ireland all the way to the English countryside. Number 2. The Chaos Cipher. The Chaos Cipher was invented in 1918 by a man named John Byrne, and it was so insanely complicated that nobody was ever able to crack his code. However, it was so simple that its mechanism was a pair of ordinary rotating discs that could fit in a tiny cigar box. The key to what turned out to be one of the most confusing ciphers ever built was so simple it could be operated by a child. Up until just a few years ago, there were only 3 people on the planet capable of cracking the code. There was the inventor's surviving son, John Byrne Jr., and 2 editors who viewed the cipher in 1990, but were sworn to complete secrecy. For almost 90 years, nobody could understand how the cipher worked, and its algorithm was guarded like the secret ingredient to Coca-Cola. But then, in 2010, Patricia Byrne, John Jr.'s wife, donated all the papers and artifacts related to the cipher to the National Cryptologic Museum in Maryland. This ultimately led to the public revealing of the Chaos Cipher algorithm. The whole thing is really simple. It works using 2 discs, each complete with the 26 letters of the alphabet. The discs spin, and occasionally they engage where 2 different letters meet. This is where the coding happens. Then the discs spin the other way, making it impossible for someone without the discs to anticipate the code. The tabs with the letters are also removable, so the discs can constantly change. The only way to break the code is by having the original discs with the letters matched in order. The device is simple, yet so effective it stumped everyone for nearly a century. Number 1. Rohan Codex. The Rohan Codex is either an extremely mysterious book in an unknown language or a sophisticated hoax from the 18th century. The illustrated manuscript has no known author, and its text is written in an unknown language system. And to this day, nobody has ever been able to decode the writing inside. The text is so bizarre and confusing that most people have dismissed it as gibberish. It looks like nonsense writing, with no rhyme or reason for the way the symbols are organized. It's been investigated by a lot of scholars and even more amateurs, but nobody has ever reached a definitive conclusion. Hungarian scholars came right out and said it was a hoax, but nobody can confirm that. The truth is that we don't know where the book came from, and we know nothing about its history. One day, out of the blue, it just kind of showed up. The Rohan Codex first appeared in Hungary in the early 19th century. It was named after the city of Rohan, where it was discovered. The book was then donated to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in 1838 by a Hungarian count, who donated the entirety of his library to the Academy before his death. He'd been holding onto the codex for an undetermined amount of time. Nobody knows where he got it, although there was an entry in his catalog that marked the year 1743. It's believed the entry is connected to the book, but nobody knows for sure. If the codex was a hoax, it wasn't perpetrated very well. If it had been in Count Gustav's collection since 1743, that means the Count was holding onto it, or at least his family was holding onto it, for nearly a century. It only reached the attention of the public by coincidence when staff at the Academy realized the puzzle they had before them. The Codex has since been picked apart by experts from every academic background, but nobody's made any progress with it. In 1866, historian Carolai Sabo accused the antiquarian Samuel Literati Nimes of creating the book as a joke. However, there is no proof connecting Nimes to the Codex, or the Codex to anyone else for that matter. Thanks for watching! Are you brave enough to take a crack at any of these codes? Let me know in the comments! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up for more! See you later! Bye!